Welcome to the Get Fit Guys, quick and dirty tips to slim down and shape up. My name is Ben Greenfield, I'm the Get Fit Guy, and in today's episode, you're going to learn how to build muscle with body weight exercises. Now, if you follow me on Twitter, you might have noticed a study I mentioned a few years ago that reported you can put on muscle just as fast with a high rep, low weight workout of 30% intensity done to failure as you can with a low rep, high weight workout done with 90% intensity to failure. And then last year in the episode, How Many Reps Should You Do to Build Muscle? I reported on a new study that shows that when it comes to building muscle, it's not about how heavy you go or how many reps you do, it's whether or not you lift to failure. This flies in the face of the traditional assumption that lifting super heavy weights for 6 to 12 reps is the only way to maximize muscle growth, and it instead shows that if you want to build muscle, also known as hypertrophy, then you can grab any weight or your own body weight and lift or move that weight until your muscles are fatigued. When it comes to building muscle, your body just knows what to do from there. Well, now there's a new study, and it takes this concept of building muscle with bodyweight exercises to an entirely new level. This study, called The Acute and Chronic Effects of No-Load Resistance Training, shows that just flexing your muscles, yes, the same way as you would if you were posing in front of the mirror, flexing your abs or flexing your biceps through a full range of motion, is just as effective as traditional weight training when it comes to building muscle. While it's important to note that actual strength gains in this study were greater for the loaded conditions compared to the non-loaded conditions, this research is definitely worth taking a closer look at if you don't want to be limited to using things like dumbbells, kettlebells, resistance bands, barbells, or machines to build muscle, and you want a body weight only option instead. So let's take a closer look at this study. The purpose of it was to remove the influence of an external load and to instead determine if muscle growth could be elicited by maximally contracting a non-loaded muscle through a full range of motion for 3 sessions a week for a total of 6 weeks. In addition, the physiologic and perceptual response to each stimulus was also looked at. So the exercise used in the research was a unilateral elbow flexion exercise, which is basically a fancy name for a bicep curl or a bicep contraction. Each arm was designated to either no load or high load condition, with high load being 70% of the 1 rep max, and no load just being repeatedly contracting one's arm as hard as possible through a full range of motion without the use of an external load. Now, in both cases, the researchers used EMG biofeedback to encourage participants to flex as hard as possible through the exercise. Well, the no-load group performed 4 sets of 20 reps of flexing their arms and extending their arms, with 30 seconds of rest time in between each of those 4 sets. The high-load group did a dumbbell curl with 70% of their 1 rep max for 4 sets of 8 to 12 reps with 90-second rests in between each set. Now, each week, extra weight and intensity was added as necessary. And if you need to review those protocols, just go to quickanddirtytips.com and look for the show notes to this episode number 296. So, what did they find? Well, there was a significant increase in muscle thickness and size from pre-test to post-test over the course of the 6 weeks, but no difference in the thickness or the size between the no-load versus the high-load condition. And the researchers concluded that, quote, these results extend previous studies that have observed muscle growth across a range of external loads and muscle actions and suggest that muscle growth can occur independent of an external load provided there are enough muscle fibers undergoing mechanotransduction. So, basically, as long as sufficient tension is produced, contracting a muscle through the full range of motion, even with no external load or weight, increases your muscle size comparable to high-load training. However, high-load training produces bigger increases in actual muscle strength and muscle endurance compared to no-load training. So how does this type of training actually work? Well, it begins with something called isometrics. And the term isometrics, which combines the Greek word isos, which means equal or the same, and metron, which means distance or measure, refers to a muscle contraction without any visible movement in the angle of the joint. This is in contrast to traditional moving contraction called called isotonic contractions, and these are contractions in which your muscle length and joint angle change throughout the exercise. Well, if you've ever done a wall squat in which you sit in an imaginary chair with your back against the wall for as long as you possibly can, you're familiar with isometric exercising. Your legs are certainly burning, but you're not budging an inch. Other popular examples of isometric exercises are the front plank, the side plank, the abdominal hold in yoga or Pilates. You get the idea. Well, if you really want to take isometric exercises to the next level, you can even use a technique called extreme isos, in which you do indeed move your muscles, but you move them through a very, very slow range of motion, taking as long as 5 to 10 minutes to do a single repetition. Now, as you can imagine, this takes a lot of focus. Go ahead and just try to do a 10-minute push-up and see what happens to your body. Well, in addition to all the cardiovascular and strength training benefits I've talked about in previous Get Fit Guy episodes about super slow training and isometrics, and I'll link to those in the show notes over at quickanddirtytips.com. And again, this is episode 296. Things like increased cardiac output, better training of your muscles to pump lactic acid and buffer it, and increased ability to withstand an external force. Isometric exercises also result in better muscle utilization and better muscle coordination. Think about it this way. Whether you're running a marathon, shoveling snow, or lifting a piece of furniture, if the wrong muscles are turning on for any given movement, then you have poor technique. And this means you increase your risk of injury and you produce less than ideal force. But your body can learn how to utilize the correct muscles, and just like any movement, it's easier to learn how to use the right muscles when you train slowly or you hold a position with an emphasis on maximally activating the specific muscle groups that you want to work. Well, in my episode called Get More Lean Muscle with Isometric Training, you learn that with this type of training, you can just do a weekly or every other week workout in which you include at least one move or a series of moves that you do really slowly or you hold for a long period of time. For example, you could do one set of each of the following exercises, timed so that it takes you 10 to 60 seconds to go up and 10 to 60 seconds to come down. Or just hold any of these exercises in the hardest to hold position for as long as you can, up to 5 minutes. Try these: the push-up, the pull-up, the dip, the lunge, and the wall squat. Easy enough. Another isometric technique you can use is to simply do them when you normally be standing around anyways, like doing a wall squat while you're on the phone or holding a push-up position during the commercial break of a TV program. Now, I recently finished reading a book called Neuromass, which is chock full of good body weight and isometric training routines. The relatively simple routine outlined in the book has absolutely blown my mind. It basically goes like this. You start with what is called a grind, which is basically a super slow set. For example, if you're doing this type of training for your legs, you might do a super slow lunge with one leg forward and the back leg elevated on a step or a bench behind you. Next, you would move into like a power or an explosive movement. For example, using the leg training analogy I just provided, you could do a lunge jump. And finally, you finish with an isometric hold that builds up a ton of lactic acid and finishes off the muscle group. For this, you could use something like an isometric lunge hold. And that's it. And you can do these type of workouts with kettlebells or dumbbells or barbells, but also your own body weight. And because of how much I travel, I've been doing these workouts several times a week in a hotel room or a park. The workouts are kind of unconventional, but I highly recommend them as yet another way to build muscle with body weight only exercises. So, if your goal is to build muscle, does this mean you never need to visit the gym again? Are health clubs that have weights now useless? Well, not exactly. Remember, strength and function are important, not just hypertrophy and muscle growth. And as the study results show, strength and function are best built with some kind of external load. Next, this study examined beginner exercisers who may respond better to bodyweight only exercisers compared to trained participants. And finally, the study looked at biceps only, and it would be interesting to observe if the same results apply to all the other muscle groups too. However, if you're pressed for time and don't have much equipment, it does indeed look like a body weight only training session comprised of something like 4 sets of 20 reps of hard, controlled movements for a body part, with about 30 seconds of rest in between sets, can certainly build muscle size if that's your goal. Now, if you have questions, comments, or feedback about how to build muscle with bodyweight exercises, or anything else discussed in this episode, you can join the conversation over at facebook.com/getfitguy. That's facebook.com/getfitguy. And until next time, I'm Ben Greenfield, the Get Fit Guy, asking you, what are you waiting for? Go get fit.